So we've been talking about menopause, the impact that it has on women, why it's been such a taboo subject, and also some of our personal experiences with menopause. And it's just interesting to hear all the different experiences, but they all come back to these three words: the unknown, the change, and growing old. So we're going to go bring it back into the workplace. And so I want to ask, and I'm going to start out with Dan. Um, to what extent do you believe the menopause is having an impact on organizations' productivity and employee well-being? What do you think is happening in this space, Dan?
I think it must be doing because taking on what Michelle was saying earlier around those that may have doubted themselves, gone part time, done things differently. I think the difficulty is we don't actually know because we don't talk about it because we're not always aware that it's going on, that we can't measure something and its impact. But you have to assume that it is, because the simple fact is that because we don't know about it, because we're not doing things to maybe support that, there are negative impacts because of that. So I do think it must be, and it's something that we need to try and change. Back to the word of change, and how we do that, because again, although it's good that people feel more comfortable talking about it in 2023 as we are now, some people will want to not talk about it still, and they want to do it, but it's how can we make them feel comfortable enough to know that they can be supported without having to talk about it, and how as a workplace we can ensure that people are able to take their time, delay things if they need to, if they're not, again, as a man not understanding what it's actually like for women to go through it, how can we make that space a comfortable one for women, and how they can manage that change in their own way, because everybody's doing it in their different ways as well. That's something that my own mum told me. She said she was quite lucky. Some of her friends had it really bad, and it's very different for everybody. So that's the mission. I see it. The goal as an organisation, or any organisation, is how can we make this like anything else that anybody goes through is something that we can support individuals through, and we can support whatever their needs are, and understanding they will vary. I do remember working with somebody, and I think something Katherine said earlier about kind of just tackling it head on sometimes for women, and maybe making a bit of a joke of it. I remember somebody referring to it as having one of their power surges, and just sat alongside me. Okay, fair enough. Middle of winter, you want to open a window, that's fine. But it brings it out. It makes they've got it out in the open. But from the man's perspective, we need to learn about it. We do need to educate ourselves, because I think some men get a little bit, oh, I don't know this. That sounds like something I don't want to talk about or even engage on, which is why I had the joy of being the only male person on the menopause chat that year and a half ago. Uh, and we have to take that away, that taboo side of it for men. They feel like it's because they don't understand. I would say most of the time, 90%, they just don't understand it, and therefore don't understand it. I'm just going to steer clear of it. But that's not helpful. So.
No, definitely. And I think the reason why I like the point that you make, that men may not know about it, but they need to know about it, because we have quite a lot of men in managerial positions. It is so important that men do get that growth mindset to say, look, I don't know about it, but I want to. So let me ask Michelle. Michelle, what are your thoughts on this in terms of how is menopause having an impact on organizational productivity?
Yeah. So I work for a charity. Shore Trust is a charity, and like most charities, a significant portion of the workforce are female. So we have around 67%. And we, like other organisations, we want to attract and retain people. So we were looking at the churn rates and people who were leaving us. So we have good data within Shore Trust. So we did a bit of a sort of data analysis and worked out that given we have around 3,000 people within the organisation and around 1,000 volunteers, we worked out that at any one time there are likely to be 800 women experiencing menopause symptoms. And we thought, how can we have such a significant number of our workforce experiencing something that we knew nothing about? And we thought we were a caring organisation, but always aware that there's much more that we could do. So we thought, okay, this is what we're thinking. Let's organise a conference and get it opened by a very senior leader, sharing her experience, and let's just see what the temperature's like. Are people willing to talk? Well, it was an event run on Teams, and the chat went wild. It was almost like we opened, the Aladdin's box. People felt empowered to share. They were sharing stories, they were sharing tips, and we thought there's something here. We need to look into this. So as a result of that, we created a peer support group because we thought that's what was happening on screen, and that's gathered momentum. And then we had a look at ourselves, think what are we doing as a business to support this proactively. So we did some research and found there's an organisation that's running an assessment called Menopause Friendly Employer. So we thought we were a menopause friendly employer. So we thought, okay, what does it look like to be a menopause friendly employer? And it's that piece around awareness raising. We had lots of things in place, but actually, how much did we as women even know? How much do men know? So we embarked on a training program, starting with senior leadership, making it mandatory for all senior leadership, and then we made it mandatory for all line managers. And then we have it as a rolling program. We had an intensive 2 week of training, and then we have it as a rolling program on our a training academy. So we set the benchmark in terms of this is what you need to know. This is what's available within Sure Trust. We have a health and wellbeing team, so we engage with them. We engage with HR. We have a new code on our absence list for menopause, so we can track to what extent menopause is affecting our staff. Um, we have lots of awareness raising events. We have guidance for line managers about how to support their colleagues who are going through the menopause. We engage facilities in terms of air conditioning, fans, windows. We don't have uniforms, but for certain areas of the business, there are uniforms. So we do lots of consultation with staff, men and women, and our staff networks, and really try to look at what was in place and what needs to be put in place and to celebrate that. So it's mentioned at sort of staff induction. We have regular events talking about what we do, and we, from a data perspective, can look to see, is this an issue in terms of absence? Is this an issue in terms of disciplinaries and grievances? Is this an issue in terms of exits to the business as well? So at a strategic level, we can look to see whether menopause is affecting any of these processes. But actually, we're leading with this is an environment where you can talk about menopause. Managers can ask about menopause. We want to know how we can support you. And it's really working well. We have really open conversations, and it bleeds into all the other staff networks as well. So we have our managing staff network, they discuss it too. And they're the particular issue for, our race equality network. So there are cultural issues around menopause. So it's really enlightening, and we're really proud of the kind of steps we've taken and the fact that people are mentioning these sorts of things now in normal conversations. So that's the stance we've gone to, really.
Wow, wow. And that's just so powerful in terms of raising the awareness and looking at the data, and all these people that could potentially be in that sort of menopause age and not knowing. And I like that segue into looking at how it might impact, sickness, disciplinaries, all of those different things. Now, Katherine, thanks for sharing that. It's really powerful. And Katherine, I'm going to ask you the same question. And I know that we did some reporting a couple of years ago, and 2 years ago, IC24 was a Gen X organization. The majority of our women were of the Gen X range. So what are your thoughts in terms of how could menopause be impacting us at IC24?
I think all the time menopause is considered and managed through a sickness process. It will always impact performance, and it will always impact an organisation's productivity, because the only process that people have to work within, or the framework to work in, is if you can't actually get yourself to work for your start time, you go off sick. because we are treating menopause as a illness rather than a life sort of development of your life. And all the time you're still managing that process through a sickness policy, you will never have a position where you're not significantly impacting an organisation's productivity. And we're also then, exactly as you just said, Sylvia, having people being managed through a sickness policy that's not reflective of, so it's not flexible enough to deal with somebody going through menopause. A lot of large organisations will have policies that say if you're off sick within a certain amount of period of time, so many times, well, you're going to hit those triggers really quickly. So for me, it's unless we can start acknowledging that menopause signs and symptoms are not a sickness and illness, and therefore may require a different handling method and a different policy, you will always adversely impact your performance of the organisation and somebody's commitment to work for that organisation. So for me, and certainly as we look at the different requirements of the different generations that work for us, certainly at IC24, we've got a range of people. Certainly some of parts of our service have a much older workforce, some have a very young workforce, and therefore trying to manage them all in the same policies and processes is not going to work. So I think for me, that's certainly something you've got to ensure we have frameworks that manage life stages, not illness. So that's really, really vital. Menopause is not an illness, or some of your symptoms may make you feel you're ill, but they certainly shouldn't be managed through a sickness policy. So,
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it's it's relevant for this conversation, but that's relevant across a lot of different things that people have to go through in life. And I think we talked about why we don't, why was menopause such a taboo subject, but equally organisations and how they are flexible to their workforce. Once upon a time, you all have to fit into one mould, and therefore, if you have X amount of absences, well, that's life. You're going to have to be managed out. But I think as we are as a society, as an organisation, we're definitely moving towards that. Where we get really stuck sometimes, I think, is those. From my perspective, the operational roles that are set times, how do you build in the flexibility for those people? But it's not impossible. These things are not impossible. And it's about understanding, people and starting to treat them as not workers, but as people, and that everybody's going to go through something in their life that requires one day, do you know what, I'm just going to need a half a day off, or I need a day off. And that, I've had those in my times. And Katherine used to be my boss once upon a time. And I text them, I've got something going on today. Don't worry about it. Take today, come back tomorrow, and we'll sort it out. And that happens, and especially with small children. But around menopause, the same thing. It's being able to acknowledge that people will need time, and if you give them the flexibility, actually, you probably get more in return. Because it's the extra mile they'll then go, knowing that they're supported by their managers, by their organisation, and so actually by probably changing our approach, similar to what Michelle detailed there from the Shaw Trust, that's some amazing steps forward. Doing that, you'll actually start to probably increase your productivity from those individuals, because they'll be looking to make it up and go the extra mile when they're feeling like they're more capable. So I think that's a really, really good step forward from your organisation, Michelle.
And I think you're absolutely right, Dan. Life stages are exactly what they are. And sometimes the right thing to say to somebody going through a life stage, as Dan's brought it up, I'll use him as an example, just had a brand new baby. Some days it was, Dan, will you go for a walk along the beach, please? You need that life. You need somebody to support you to enjoy that life stage, get the best out of them while they get used to some form of transition. And that happens across everybody's lives, all different ages, and menopause is one of them. So I think we have to be much more creative in how we support people.
I think that's the kind of the approach that we're taking, that we want to enable people to be effective in the workplace. And it could be that we require a reasonable adjustment if you have a disability. You may need some flexibility on time if you're looking after children or elderly relatives, or going through something yourself. And that's exactly what we found. When we are flexible and encouraging and adaptable, I mean, obviously within reason, we still need to deliver. But I think if our colleagues can see that we're trying to work with them to not make their life more difficult than it needs to be, you get that back tenfold, you know. So I think it works for everybody. And that's where you get your attention from as well. And that's where they recommend the organisation to somebody else. Most people come to work wanting to do a good job. Sometimes they just need a bit of support to enable them to do that. And I think we find that with our staff networks. I mean, they produce amazing things, and a lot of it they're happy to meet up after work because they're passionate about it, and it gives them a different skill set. It enables them to showcase the work they're doing, which helps their career. But they're doing it because they're passionate about it, and they've been given the opportunity to shine within the organisation. So, I think sometimes we do need to have a more flexible, agile approach to this, which is tricky. You know, I don't want to present it as very easy. It is tricky, but it's worth the investment. That's what we found. And you learn things about the organisation and different people within the organisation by doing that, because you find out who the intransigent people are and who the flexible, adaptive people are as well. So there's always intel in there too.
And what I like about this, certainly, when I was going through my most intense time, I actually did take 6 months off because I just could not. I wasn't sleeping. I was waking up throughout the night. I was, really deprived of sleep, and it was just impacting me. And it wasn't that I needed days off. I just needed flexibility. So if I went to bed at 4 o'clock, could I start at 9:30? That's all I needed. I didn't feel sick, like I couldn't cope. I just needed that flexibility. So I just wanted to ask a couple of questions before we just go on to look at it from a men's perspective. So Dan brought up a really good point about, the set hours, the set rotas that some jobs require. What are your thoughts then, anyone, about how we can bring that flexibility and all support employees that are in these kind of set rotas?
I think there are definitely ways of being able to approach that. I think Katherine made a point of, treating menopause as an illness. Actually, if you could create for some people, and again, they don't have to acknowledge it, but allowing that we discussed this in one of the groups, that a woman could just take. There was a certain number of times you can just take days. You don't necessarily always have to explain them. You might do art like post-event, but it's not necessarily something that goes against your sickness record straight away or absence record. Flexibility in rotas, allowing, there's an ability to shift your start times, flex them around, of course, again, within reason, because business needs are business needs. But I think the design of how we design people's working patterns is something that can definitely move forward. Flexi rotas aren't new, but for things like what we deliver in a contact center environment, and our peaks in demands are fairly static. We know when they are. People wanting to move those. That initial operational reaction. God, we can't do that. But absolutely, there are ways of being able to do that, because it might be that you can gain that time back somewhere else. And I think it's designing more flexible approaches where actually the people, the colleagues, have the ability to do that themselves without having to request sometimes.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you so much. We can do it. And that's from an operational expert himself. Katherine.
I was going to absolutely say that, Dan, is that, of course, operationally you kind of go, oh really, I'm gonna have to change that, but actually by changing something slightly you may not lose a full 8 hours of productivity, because actually there might, if you say absolutely understand you didn't sleep last night, are you happy to come in later, would that suit you better? And I think Michelle made the point, you get so much more from people work for people respond to people, and I think if you can demonstrate that actually, yes, we know some of this won't be ideal, but I think the more you treat people in that supportive way, you will lose less hours. If you don't, you won't get the flexibility back. And as Dan said, actually there's always a negotiation that, today's not working for you, I completely get it. And actually, if they came to work, they wouldn't be productive anyway. So, it's balancing off. All organisations, whether they're contact centres, whatever, have to be balanced off. Is it better having a right person or just a person? Now, some days, if you come to work as just a person, you're not going to do the best for yourself, your colleagues you're working with, or for us, patients we deal with. So actually, what are we losing?
And we should build it into our forward planning. We know that we're going to have the need for people. We do it from an absence perspective, a holiday perspective. So I think trying to collate data, as they've done at the Shaw Trust, would be really helpful with that. But it's also which is very difficult for operational people, to get ourselves away from the granular detail and actually big picture. If you've got a couple of people, what's the chances that everybody that is in your organization going through the menopause at the same time, that they're all going to want the same hours off? No, they're not. It's not likely. So big picture is actually a bit of flex to one or two individuals on that day, the next day, doesn't impact us overall. What if we're saying that it does? That's poor planning from the organization, not from the people. So
and also lack of business agility, as I think as well. Businesses going forward are going to have to become more agile in their thinking, in the way they operate, and this is in a way forces a hand. And I think often, if you've built a culture where the colleagues respect each other, understand each other, and share as much as they want to, absolutely sharing everything, they can quite often come up with solutions themselves. You could have people who would prefer to start a couple of hours later, work a bit later. Other people are morning people, they prefer to do mornings. And I suppose if that flexibility doesn't exist, that person will turn up, will just ring in sick. So you miss the whole day of them rather than missing a couple of hours. So it could be, it's difficult in contact centres because I know obviously you need to be public facing the whole time. But we've worked out what does need to be done face to face and what could be done at home after you put the kids to bed or you pick them up from school, So just thinking in a much more agile way, we're going to have to, because we need to recruit people in a different way than we have done in the past. And people are prioritising their work-life balance as well. And, so if we're not agile and we don't sit well with their values, then they're not going to come to us either. So it's incumbent upon employers to think in an agile way. But it doesn't, it's been modelled from the top.
I think what you've just said there around coming from the top, though, is one of the most important things, whatever it is, whether it's about the menopause or, something close to me was about being a parent and still doing a demanding job. And Katherine will know that occasionally you'll see the top of a baby's head or a child clambering all over me. And it's okay. That's fine. There's no issue with it. And it's sending the message that it's okay, because you're not just this person that comes to work and when you're not there, we assume you go back in a cupboard somewhere until it's the next day. You have a life. You have things going on around you. So whatever it is, it's the organisation lives it from the top. Then those lower down in that chain of people will start to realise it's okay, because it's happening, and making it normal practice, whatever it is, and that's I think I would say, thankfully, I do work in an organisation where that is the case, and I wasn't nervous about having my baby on a call or being interrupted, because the other day my 2-year-old decided to try and smash the back door with the clothesline thing, and so sorry to go with it. But I think that's the key thing, is letting people know, and that's a cultural change for a lot of people, and you have to keep enforcing it. It's not a once and done thing. It's keep enforcing that message.
I think this is just such a great conversation, and I think as well as I've been following what's been said, there's something about making sure that we take people with us on the journey. So the senior leaders may know why we're investing or having this flexible approach, but we need to really make sure team managers and people that work more closely to the wider. I think a lot of organizations sometimes don't get that quite right.
It's the middle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the frozen middle, as they call it, the frozen middle. And so therefore all this great work starts, and then you get like a person that works closely with an employee saying, well, no, you can't. Or even the way they may talk about it, oh, she's off again, or menopause. We've got to really build it in a very inclusive environment where it's not seen as you're the problem and we're having a reasonable adjustment because of you, and you haven't got a disability, but look what's happening here. It's not sickness. How am I supposed to, log this? It's really supposed to be done really sensitively, bearing in mind the psychological impact that menopause can have on people, paranoia and all of those different things. So it's so important that the implementation, I think, really is done well, and we take everyone with us on the journey. Wow. So I've just got one question. I think we might have answered the last one, but we've been talking about menopause from a woman's perspective predominantly. But we do know that there is some thoughts out there about whether men go through the menopause, and if so, what is it, and how might they, talk about it or acclimatize to the idea of having reasonable adjustments for them. So I'm going to ask Katherine to kick off. What are your views on the male menopause and the potential physical and psychological impact on men in the workplace?
I think this is really new, isn't it? Certainly, we're kind of going back in time. If you think people aren't talking about the female menopause, well, there'll be the schools of thought like, oh, men jumping on our bandwagon again. There'll be the school of thought, oh, well, it's always been called a midlife crisis. Why are we labeling it something different? So I think there's a lot to kind of work through, but why as men, why would the thought be as men age, why they wouldn't go through physical changes with changes in hormone levels, all those things. So I think it's something that needs to kind of be addressed. And I think something that sticks in my mind for men is maternity, paternity leave took ages to kind of get going. So it's kind of like, oh, we're finally getting to a space where we realise things aren't just gender specific. And so I think there's a huge debate to be had about what it means. I think there's the physical side that I think there needs to be more research and more understanding about what's actually happening. But actually, when you think as from an employer perspective, we're still grappling with something as basic as paternity leave, not in just our organisation, as a society. What does that mean? And do men go through postnatal depression? Yes, it may not be driven by hormones, but they have gone through a massive life change with no hormonal support at all. I just think we are getting better at understanding well-being, and however we need to label it. I think, Sylvia, we've had conversations. Even if a man is going through as a partner of a woman in menopause, well, we know that's men on pause because there's something they don't even recognise. So for me, it's a bigger issue in terms of, again, it's understanding life stages and what does that mean for everybody going through a life stage. I don't think we'll ever be able to label it correctly, because I'd be surprised if any man wanted to ever say they were going through menopause.
Men on pause.
Yeah. So I just think it's a big kind of topic.
And just an aside question, do you take it seriously then that men could really be going through men on pause? Menopause.
I think
they're seriously as women.
Probably not at this stage. I think there's still a lot to learn. There is still that kind of, of course they can't be left out. Bring them into the party. But I do think it is real. But as I say, I also think, as I said previously, men also go through a massive shift after childbirth, after a partner, whether they're living with the partner or not. There's life cycles that affect everybody.
I think the label thing is the key. I think is where most men do not engage with it, because I had a conversation with a man about the menopause. Well, of course it's not real. Well, what do you mean? Well, because the menopause, it's the menstrual cycle on pause. We don't have one, therefore it can't be real. Okay. So take the label away from it, and then you start to look at the symptoms, which is, I Googled it before today, and then listening to everything we're all talking about, it's no different in terms of it is a change due to age. Things are getting different. Our bodies do change. I mean, I'm 38, so still hopefully got some time before, where they're saying this is kind of late 40s, early 50s. But I'm not what I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I'm noticing differences as I get older. Mood swings, arguably my wife would say I already have those and have had them for a long time. But I think it's about understanding that actually, everybody will be going through some form of change as they get older, psychological, physical, and being able to accept that that's happening. And equally, if it's impacting you, in the work or in personal life, that it's okay to actually go and talk to people about it. And that, from a male perspective, is still a massive issue. I've got 2 older brothers and my dad, and luckily I'm probably most comfortable with women because my mum's like my best friend. So, I've always got on really well with my mum. But my brothers don't talk about anything, nothing. You don't talk about your feelings. You don't talk about sensitive subjects. You don't talk about the menopause. So when they say this, I'm sure they'll be somewhat shocked that I am.
But Dan, what about some of those symptoms? It was on the NHS. It talked about men developing depression, loss of sex drive, erectile dysfunction, and other physical and emotional symptoms. I think they talked about, there's a technical name, Katherine might know, when they develop boobs.
Yes, it's the loss of hormone levels.
So it is real. It's something is happening, but they would rather suffer in silence.
When you read the symptoms, and the jokes about, men with their expensive cars and they're just an extension of something else. Well, do you know what? If they are suffering from erectile dysfunction and loss of sex drive, maybe they are trying to make up for something. I think there's no way that, talking as I am now, to think that, at some point that will happen to me, possibly. That would be quite a shocking thing for me. I'm sure my wife would be so happy. You've got your 2 kids, just stay away from me now, please. I think that I would question myself. I wouldn't want to talk to people about that necessarily. I'd feel somewhat, I think it's ingrained to me that I should feel less of a man if I can't get an erection. I know that sounds ridiculous.
Yeah. Wow.
Actually, if you look at the kind of, on a serious side, the sort of male suicide rate, it clearly is an issue that men are not taking care of themselves, not seeking advice and so on. We have a male support group called Managing, and they reported to our Diversity Inclusion Working Group meeting, and they talk about the sort of topics that they discuss. And a lot of it is around, interesting to say, Dan, being a new dad and finding their way and how to manage and how to support their partner and feeling this weight of responsibility and all of this kind of stuff. So there are issues clear that men are dealing with, and there's not often an outlet for it. So I like the idea of, as you say, Katherine, at different life stages, you'll need different types of support.
And I think as well, as we close, it's been a really rich conversation, very open. I've loved it. I've loved it so much. My takeaway is that there's work to be done for both sides. We haven't even talked about transgender colleagues, which is for another session, but certainly looking at what more we can do to encourage women to step forward from a generational perspective, especially if they're older women. How can we prepare younger women to be ready? To be ready for this season. It doesn't have to be really bad and difficult, but it's recognizing it and being able to lean into it. And I like Katherine's approach, kind of just laugh your way, enjoy your way through it. It happens, right? We just can't get around it. It's just going to happen. Even if you're on HRT, like I succumb to, it doesn't absolve you 100% from symptoms, but what it does is just lessen it. And then there's this whole world of the male menopause, or whatever we want to call it. I like that word, male managing, managing through that through that stage. I just think it's just so important. So lots and lots to think about. Just before I go, I'm going to ask you all just to give your last thoughts to someone who may be experiencing menopause, male or female, in the office. You know, what is it, the one thing that you would encourage them to do? Let me start with Michelle.
I would say find somebody to talk to about it, because things become more intense in your head, and at the moment you say the words out loud, it means that you're then in a better position to access support, access empathy, really, and to not feel alone. So find somebody. It may not be your line manager, it may be somebody else. Just find somebody that you can explain how you're feeling to.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, very similar. Is just, seek support. I would hope if it was any of my team or any of them that they would come and speak to me. But equally, if you don't feel comfortable because I'm a man, it's something you don't want to talk to me about, then find somebody else that you can. Because Michelle's spot on. As soon as you start to talk about it, you can, that you share the load a little bit, and there are ways of supporting people through any of their changes. So yeah, seek support is the best thing you could do.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Katherine a slightly different question from an organizational strategic position perspective. What can organizations do? This is not an issue that's going to go away. What would you recommend?
I think organizations need to ensure that their leaders are leading with authenticity, because without that, you can't get a psychological safe space. So people need to know that you're vulnerable, you're happy to talk about things. And by being that kind of leader of the organization, that is the only way to get the change through, where people are happy to demonstrate they've also got vulnerabilities. It's happening to us too, and have that authenticity across the organization. So that, I think, is the biggest gift an organization can give to its workforce. Because that is what will drive that psychological safe space to do exactly what Michelle and Dan have said, to actually feel that you can talk about it, whether I'm talking about a female issue to Dan or Dan's talking about a male issue to me. It shouldn't matter, because we're all coming from the same place.
Yeah.
That does take a massive cultural change for organizations, because organizations certainly, as they've evolved, are still kind of setting performance aspects of an organization. But for organizations to survive in this new world with this new workforce, we have to have the workforce, their needs, understand life stages, and then you'll have a productive organization. So for me, organizations just have to turn themselves upside down for a little bit, shake it out, and be brave enough to be vulnerable to everybody. That would be my
interesting on that point, Katherine. What we found, we tend to open all of our awareness raising events with an exec sponsor to do exactly that, to hear it from somebody very senior, and they've quite enjoyed it. They actually quite like talking about themselves, and they're a bit nervous and a bit, so it's a good learning curve for them as well.
I think you get the best out of people if they feel that you are vulnerable as well.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes. It shows the human side of them.
Yes, as I say, and Dan has heard this a lot, people work for people. You get people do things for the person, not necessarily the organization. You get relationships that way, and when you're doing external things, people also buy from people.
Yeah,
so they leave people too. They leave managers who are not sensitive. And
organizations, they leave managers. So for me, that's absolutely fundamental.
Wow. So we hope that you have enjoyed this open, what I think has been a very rich discussion on menopause. So whether you are female or male, wherever you may be on your journey, this is something that comes to all of us. And the advice that we're giving, talk about it, be willing to talk about it. And if you're going through it, be willing to share your experiences. We all need help as we go through this journey. Well, on behalf of my guests, Michelle Jackson, Dan Hubbard, and Katherine Pitts, we want to wish you a really good day and hope that you'll tune in next time. Take care.